Hey everybody, it's Paul Saint-Amour. I'm going to be reading from the Telemachus episode of Ulysses, chapter 1. The scene where the milkwoman visits the Martello Tower. If you have the Gabler edition, it's pages 10 through 14, lines 313 to 493. In the gloomy, domed living room of the tower, Buck Mulligan's gowned form moved briskly to and fro about the hearth, hiding and revealing its yellow glow. Two shafts of soft daylight fell across the flagged floor from the high barbicans, and at the meeting of their rays a cloud of coal smoke and fumes of fried grease floated, turning. "We'll be choked," Buck Mulligan said. "Haynes, open that door, will you?" Stephen laid the shaving bowl on the locker. A tall figure rose from the hammock where it had been sitting, went to the doorway, and pulled open the inner doors. "Have you the key?" a voice asked. "Daedalus has it," Buck Mulligan said. "Janie Mac, I'm choked!" He howled without looking up from the fire. "Kinch!" "It's in the lock," Stephen said, coming forward. The key scraped round harshly twice, and when the heavy door had been set ajar, welcome light and bright air entered. Haynes stood at the doorway, looking out. Stephen hailed his upended valise to the table and sat down to wait. Buck Mulligan tossed the fry onto the dish beside him. Then he carried the dish and a large teapot over to the table, set them down heavily, and sighed with relief. "Ugh, I'm melting," he said, as the candle remarked when... But hush, not a word more on that subject. "Kinch, wake up. Bread, butter, honey. Haynes, come in. The grub is ready. Bless us, O Lord, in these thy gifts. Where's the sugar? Oh, Jay, there's no milk." Stephen fetched the loaf and the pot of honey and the butter cooler from the locker. Buck Mulligan sat down in a sudden pet. "Oh, what sort of a kip is this?" he said. "I told her to come after 8. "We can drink it black," Stephen said thirstily. "There's a lemon in the locker." "Oh, damn you and your Paris fads," Buck Mulligan said. "I want Sandy Cove milk." Haynes came in from the doorway and said quietly, "That woman is coming up with the milk." "The blessings of God on you," Buck Mulligan cried, jumping up from his chair. "Sit down, pour out the tea there. The sugar is in the bag. Here, I can't go fumbling at the damned eggs." He hacked through the fry on the dish and slapped it out on 3 plates, saying, "In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti." Haynes sat down to pour out the tea. "I'm giving you 2 lumps each," he said. "But I say, Mulligan, you do make strong tea, don't you?" Buck Mulligan, hewing thick slices from the loaf, said in an old woman's wheedling voice, "When I makes tea, as old Mother Grogan said. And when I makes water, I makes water." "By Jove, it is tea," Haynes said. Buck Mulligan went on hewing and wheedling. "So I do, Mrs. Cale," says she. "Begob, ma'am," says Mrs. Cale. "God send you don't make them in the one pot." He lunged toward his messmates in turn, a thick slice of bread impaled on his knife. "That's folk," he said very earnestly, "for your book, Haynes. 5 lines of text and 10 pages of notes about the folk and the fish gods of Dundrum, printed by the Weird Sisters in the year of the big wind." He turned to Stephen and asked in a fine, puzzled voice, lifting his brows, "Can you recall, brother, is Mother Grogan's tea and water pot spoken of in the Mabinogion, or is it in the Upanishads?" "I doubt it," said Stephen gravely. "Do you now?" Buck Mulligan said in the same tone. "Your reasons, pray?" "I fancy," Stephen said as he ate, "it did not exist in or out of the Mabinogion. Mother Grogan was, one imagines, a kinswoman of Mary Ann." Buck Mulligan's face smiled with delight. "Charming," he said in a finical, sweet voice, showing his white teeth and blinking his eyes pleasantly. "Do you think she was? Quite charming." Then, suddenly overclouding all his features, he growled in a hoarsened, rasping voice as he hewed again vigorously at the loaf. "For old Mary Ann, she doesn't care a damn, but hizing up her petticoats..." He crammed his mouth with fry and munched and droned. The doorway was darkened by an entering form. "The milk, sir." "Come in, ma'am," Mulligan said. "Kinch, get the jug." An old woman came forward and stood by Stephen's elbow. "That's a lovely morning, sir," she said. "Glory be to God." "To whom?" Mulligan said, glancing at her. "Ah, to be sure." Stephen reached back and took the milk jug from the locker. "The islanders," Mulligan said to Haines casually, "speak frequently of the collector of prepuces." "How much, sir?" asked the old woman. "A quart," Stephen said. He watched her pour into the measure and thence into the jug, rich white milk, not hers. Old shrunken paps. She poured again a measureful and a tilly. Old and secret, she had entered from a morning world, maybe a messenger. She praised the goodness of the milk, pouring it out, crouching by a patient cow at daybreak in the lush field, a witch on her toadstool, her wrinkled fingers quick at the squirting dugs. They lowed about her whom they knew, dew silky cattle. Silk of the kine and poor old woman, names given her in old times. A wandering crone, lowly form of an immortal, serving her conqueror and her gay betrayer, their common cock-queen, a messenger from the secret morning. To serve or to upbraid, whether he could not tell, but scorned to beg her favor. "It is indeed, ma'am," Buck Mulligan said, pouring milk into their cups. "Taste it, sir," she said. He drank at her bidding. If I could live on good food like that," he said to her somewhat loudly, "we wouldn't have the country full of rotten teeth and rotten guts, living in a bog swamp, eating cheap food, and the streets paved with dust, horse dung, and consumptive spits." "Are you a medical student, sir?" the old woman asked. "I am, ma'am," Buck Mulligan answered. "Look at that now," she said. Stephen listened in scornful silence. She bows her old head to a voice that speaks to her loudly, her bone-setter, her medicine man. Me she slights. To the voice that will shrive in oil for the grave all there is of her but her woman's unclean loins, of man's flesh made not in God's likeness, the serpent's prey, and to the loud voice that now bids her be silent with wondering, unsteady eyes. "Do you understand what he says?" Stephen asked her. "Is it French you're talking, sir?" the old woman said to Haines. Haines spoke to her again, a longer speech, confidently. "Irish," Buck Mulligan said. "Is there Gaelic on you?" "I thought it was Irish," she said, "by the sound of it. Are you from the West, sir?" "I am an Englishman," Haines answered. "He's English," Buck Mulligan said, "and he thinks we ought to speak Irish in Ireland." "Sure we ought to," the old woman said, "and I'm ashamed I don't speak the language myself. I'm told it's a grand language by them that knows." "Grand is no name for it," said Buck Mulligan. "Wonderful, entirely. Fill us out some more tea, Kinch. Would you like a cup, ma'am?" "No, thank you, sir," the old woman said, slipping the ring of the milk can on her forearm and about to go. Haines said to her, "Have you your bill? We had better pay her, Mulligan, hadn't we?" Stephen filled again the 3 cups. "Bill, sir," she said, halting. "Well, it's 7 mornings a pint at 2pence, is 7 twos is a shilling, and 2pence over, and these 3 mornings a quart at 4pence is 3 quarts is a shilling. That's a shilling and 1 and 2 is 2 and 2, sir." Buck Mulligan sighed, and having filled his mouth with a crust thickly buttered on both sides, stretched forth his legs and began to search his trouser pockets. "Pay up and look pleasant," Haines said to him, smiling. Stephen filled a 3rd cup, a spoonful of tea coloring faintly the thick, rich milk. Buck Mulligan brought up a florin, twisted it round in his fingers, and cried, "A miracle!" He passed it along the table towards the old woman, saying, "Ask nothing more of me, sweet. All I can give you, I give." Stephen laid the coin in her uneager hand. "We'll owe 2pence, he said. "Time enough, sir," she said, taking the coin. "Time enough. Good morning, sir." She curtsied and went out, followed by Buck Mulligan's tender chant, "Heart of my heart, were it more, more would be laid at your feet." He turned to Stephen and said, Seriously, Daedalus, I'm stony. Hurry out to your school kip and bring us back some money. Today the bards must drink and junket. Ireland expects that every man this day will do his duty. That reminds me, Haines said, rising, that I have to visit your National Library today. Our swim first, Buck Mulligan said. He turned to Stephen and asked blandly, Is this the day for your monthly wash, Kinch? Then he said to Haines, The unclean bard makes a point of washing once a month. All Ireland is washed by the Gulf Stream, Stephen said as he let honey trickle over a slice of the loaf. Haines, from the corner where he was knotting easily a scarf about the loose collar of his tennis shirt, spoke, I intend to make a collection of your sayings, if you will let me. Speaking to me, they wash and tub and scrub. Again bite of inwit. Conscience. Yet here's a spot. That one about the cracked looking-glass of a servant being the symbol of Irish art is deuced good. Buck Mulligan kicked Stephen's foot under the table and said with warmth of tone, Wait till you hear him on Hamlet, Haines. Well, I mean it, Haines said, still speaking to Stephen. I was just thinking of it when that poor old creature came in. Would I make any money by it? Stephen asked. Haines laughed, and as he took his soft grey hat from the holdfast of the hammock, said, I don't know, I'm sure. Happy Bloomsday, everyone.